Hi, welcome back. This is the China Today series, lecture 3. In this particular presentation, I'd like to address how China can secure its future. Just a recap, China's current problem is that it is the largest fraction, holding the largest fraction of the US overseas government bonds as well as US currency. All the sea routes is under the US control, and the about two isn't a problem until the United States views China as a potential enemy. So, how I conclude that the USA view China as a potential enemy. So, that's from the so-called pivoting and then rebalancing, pivoting in Pacific from the US. Internally, China also faced some problems. For example, the GDP growth of 7.4% last year, 2014, is the lowest in the last 25 years. The infrastructure has almost completed, half of it is completed, so it is entering into a new phase. The environmental problem in China is huge. So we all know that because mostly due to the coal-powered electricity plant. China depends on import. It is now the largest importer of oil in the world. So China do depends a lot on import in oil. Of course, we all know that China has a huge income inequality, which I will address in a later lecture. So again, if you were the Chinese leader, what would you do? So the first thing we notice is that China has organized this so-called Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization started life in 26 April 1996 as a Shanghai Five. That means there are 5 countries, and then later on, Uzbekistan also joined. That becomes the Shanghai Six. Finally, the Russia and China signed a treaty called the Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation. Quite a tricky name. Basically, what China want to do is maintain a friendly neighborhood, at least in the north and in the west. We know that the China facing problems mainly from the eastern sea coast. So if China have a security problem at both ends, then it will be a big problem. So for one thing, China wants to make sure that on the other borders, it is at least peaceful. And this cooperation is viewed by the West as a counterbalance to the NATO military force. So all the country in red is within this Shanghai cooperation. So what is the middle white thing there? That's the Mongolia. Mongolia also have a pretty good relationship with China as well. After the Xi Jinping becomes the president, his first visit is to Russia, not to United States, because he viewed Russia as a good friend. In 2014, last year, we all know that China and Russia signed 2 major energy supply deals. Most of the news from the Western media is about the natural gas. In fact, Russia will become the largest oil supplier to China as well. China and Russia do quite a bit of military exercise. At the moment, China is helping Russia to develop a port, which is in the Far East, and this is a ice-free port. That is very important to Russia as well. For China, that is another port to ship up its goods. Obviously, China also bought quite a bit of fighter planes from Russia. These five heads of state represent the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, but not in that order. If we're looking at from the left, we have the Putin, and then the Modi, and then the Russia, Brazil president, and then Xi Jinping, and then is the president of South Africa. What these organizations do is that they want to develop a investment bank, again focused on infrastructure. They call it the New Development Bank. The New Development Bank is a multilateral development bank operated by these five states, and it is going to be a alternative to the existing US-dominated World Bank and the IMF. Looking at the characteristics of these five different nations, they are all different. This little diagram shows how different they are. Some have China obviously is the largest import and exporter, and it has the largest GDP. But in terms of the household spending, government spending, and GDP per capita, China is not the greatest. China is the fourth. 1, 2, 3. Yes, China is the fourth per capita. So China is poor. But because of the population, combined GDP is great. So this group of five countries are very, very different. So when they formed this New Development Bank, China contributed most of the capitals. So China, in here we see that China every country will contribute $10 billion as the initial capital. And then with a reserve of 100 billion, China will provide 41 billion in that reserve. The other four, except South Africa, they all contribute 28 billion. Another hot topic lately, I'm referring to late March or April this year, 2015, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank becomes quite a hot topic. The bank, the CIIB, is initiated because China is extremely frustrated with the slow reform of the IMF and World Bank. The reform agreement has been in place for at least 6 years, but the US Senate has been blocking the change, and therefore seeing no alternative there, so China initiated to start its own infrastructure investment bank. The bank signed a memorandum, I should say 21 countries signed the memorandum of understanding to the establishment of the investment bank. And this is the head of state signing. I don't think they are head of state. They are the financial ministers of these nations signing the memorandum. The signing ceremony is held in Beijing and formally recognized the establishment of the bank. And these 21 countries include China, India, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, the Philippines, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Benin, Cambodia, Kazakhstan, Kuwait, Laos, Myanmar, Mongolia, Nepal, Oman, Qatar, Sri Lanka, Uzbekistan, and Vietnam. Among them, we can notice that some of them has territory dispute with China. For example, there are border issues between China and India, and we know that the Philippines, the Vietnam also have dispute about the South China Sea. There's also the dispute of the Diaoyu Island with Japan, but Japan is not included in this list. So managing this AIIB is going to be a challenge, not only financially, but also politically. the organization will look something like this. This is not yet fully confirmed yet. The latest news is that in June this year they will sign off on the constitution of the bank. Notice here, we notice that South Korea, Australia, Indonesia didn't join, but later on they, except South Korea, all joined. The first move from joining this bank, yes, at the beginning of the year, Chinese announced that it welcomes other countries to join the bank. The deadline for joining as a founding member is set at 31st March 2015. So UK submitted the application in mid-March. Of course, the US is not happy, so the United States, the White House issued a pointed statement declaring its hopes and expects the UK will use its influence to ensure the high standards of governance are upheld in the new Chinese-led investment bank. So I see that as a double standard because looking at the reform of the IMF and World Bank, it is the US blocking the reform. After that, the others follows. When I wrote this slide, it is still may follow because I presented it in late March. But we now know that France, Germany, and Italy joined together about 3 or 4 days after United Kingdom announced their joining. And then onwards, then a lot of countries joins. Up to now, we have about 67 countries joined the AIIB. So that is one investment the Chinese is making. The bank itself is have a capital of 100 billion, and the capital share will base on the GDP. The total share from non-Asia company, I think, is limited to 25%, and therefore, with this initial memorandum of understanding, then China will be the largest stakeholders in this particular bank. China also announced another fund, the Silk Road Fund. We know that China and the West has been trading through the Middle East. So the Chinese merchants actually go to just the Middle East, and then the Middle East take the Chinese goods and then send it onwards to Europe, and that is the Silk Road. This Silk Road Fund is managed like an investment fund. So it is totally financed by China, and the China put in $40 billion into it. What it wants to do is try to re-establish the old Silk Road. So one of the answers Xi Jinping towards the security of China is by establishing a sea, instead of a sea route, it also established a land-based route from China right to Italy. So from China, we start from Xi'an, the old capitals of China. So Beijing has been the capital of China only in the last 300, 500 years. That for a long, long time, Xi'an is the capital of China. So again, we are establishing Xi'an as the starting point from the China side, and then built a high-speed rail, probably, and some also highways connecting Xi'an to Italy. So that is his answer to the one of the routes that may be blocked. If the routes are being blocked from the sea, then China will at least have another route coming from inland. Here is what he is planned. The green ones are all the existing or historical routes. What Xi Jinping want to do is extend that routes right to Europe and connecting Europe, Africa, and Asia into one economic zone. So imagine the size of this economic zone. The European Union, EU, is the largest you will count it as one organization, has the largest GDP. Then comes the United States, and then comes China. And in terms of population, China and India is about the same. India is catching up to the population of China. So these two countries will at least represent 40% of the world's population. The roots also include Africa. Africa is a potential large market. So how this initiative can help China? Well, one thing is China can use the huge foreign reserve in a better way, hopefully to have a better growth rate from the foreign reserve funds. Having a peaceful neighbor secure the borders is very important as well. Obviously, the excessive infrastructure capability can be put in place because both of these investments are focused on infrastructure, and China has been doing infrastructure work for for the last 30 years. So China has accumulated quite a bit of experience in terms of building infrastructure. Especially, everybody knows the Chinese high-speed rail is a very attractive items for every country to consider, and the Li Keqiang, the Chinese premier, also is a greatest salesman for this high-speed rail. The whole idea here is that China is not going to have a one-side winner takes all. It want to establish a win-win situation, and obviously to China, secure a long-term energy source is important. In terms of the infrastructure, there are some economists having do a little bit of calculation and indicate that if a country builds an infrastructure, the upstream upstream growth is about 2 times. That means if a country invests $1 billion into infrastructure, then the upstream will have a economy about double the size, because $1 billion supplying the infrastructure, materials, technology, etc. But that $1 billion will have a multiplying factor within the upstream country. So it is about times 2. For the benefits of that infrastructure, usually it is a 3.8 to 4 times advantage. That means if you invest $1 billion into your own infrastructure, you expect to create within your own country 3 times to 4 times the value of the investment. So that is a very attractive route for countries to increase their GDP. And again, this particular approach is a win-win approach. China probably will take most of the upstream supply. So China can definitely use their foreign reserve and use their excess infrastructure capability. But the receiving country, the countries in which the infrastructure is built, have also a very significant boost to its economy. Another question has been asked is, can China sustain a 7% growth? Now, we must remember that 7% growth is still a very rapid growth. The average GDP growth is over the history is about 3 to 4%. So the Chinese growth of over 10% for the last 30-something years is already a historical record. Then, if they can maintain a 7% growth, it's still a record. Of course, 7%, some country now and then will have a 7% growth. For example, in 2015, India is expected to grow by 7.4 or 6%. So India GDP growth will overtake China in 2015 in terms of growth rates, not in terms of the oversize the economy. But looking within China, we notice that there are quite a number of cities or province is able to maintain a 10% growth in 2014. That is last year's data. So, for example, in the two western province, which traditionally has been poor, has been growing at a 10% growth. And Tianjin is another is the industrial center of China. So we expect that to grow as well. One of the interesting things that happened in 2015 is that on the first day after the holiday, the Premier Li Keqiang visited the Shenzhen Special Economic Zone. Now, Shenzhen Economic Zone was started by Xi Jinping's father. That was about 30 years ago when Deng Xiaoping allowed China to open. Once China opened, the first economic zone is the Shenzhen Special Economic Zone. At that time, Shenzhen is just a small fishing village with a population of a few thousand. But today, Shenzhen's total population is over 10 million. And its GDP overtakes the capital of Guangdong as the most important city, one of the most important city. In terms of the Chinese top 10 important city, Shenzhen has now come into that list. Shenzhen is one of the top 10 cities in China. This One Belt, One Road project obviously will take a couple of years to actually start. You have the feasibility studies and the investment. There's quite a bit of work before any building will start. So if there is any benefit to China, the benefits from the One Belt, One Road will not come in the next 1 or 2 years. It will have to come in at least 2 to 3 years later. Obviously, because of infrastructure, you need different types of planning in order to do that. China's GDP just exceeded 10 trillion US dollars in 2014, and it is expected to grow at 6.8% in 2015. So China is slowing down, but not exactly very slow, because as I said, the overall GDP growth throughout history is 3 to 4%. If it is a 6.8%, that means it will inject $680 billion into the world economy, and that is larger than the whole of South Africa. So that we can see the impact of Chinese growth is huge. What are the Chinese competitive advantage? Well, these are some listed by some scholars. I'm just quoting them, but I will not tell you the references, because this is just a more casual presentation rather than a formal academic work. So the advantages listed are highly motivated people, the more science and technology graduates than any other countries. It has a very diverse environment, and hence have built quite a bit of experience. It itself have a large domestic market, and the Chinese people want to reclaim the historical glory that Chinese enjoyed in the past 2,000 years. So Chinese are pretty motivated. We can see a lot of more actions in the years to come. So this ends this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Bye-bye.